masks, and he developed a whole kind of magic based on the Hermetic correspondences, this kind of nature magic and drawing on influences of the stars and so on. So this was sort of Themistocles Plethon's lectures on Platonism led to the Renaissance, basically, in a kind of short thumbnail sketch. So this was one of these people who most people don't know about, but it's very important. Another thing that he brought with him from Constantinople was translations of the Greek geographer Strabo, and it was because of those translations that Christopher Columbus would be able to discover America. So we have a Greek, we have a Byzantine Platonist to thank for the discovery of America.
Fascinating.
So, I mean, give that to the Masons, right?
Certainly. And
take a lot out of that.
And no story about the Renaissance, I don't think, would be complete if we didn't mention Pico, because he was a really fascinating figure in his own right.
Yeah, well, he burned his candle very bright, very briefly. Pico della Mirandola was one of these Renaissance, geniuses, polymath, polyglot. He knew several languages, and read the ancient Greeks. But he also, what was happening at the time as well was was his attempt, which, as you see in the book, goes on for quite a long time. As most of the history of the West is about this attempt to either to wed or to completely separate sort of Greek philosophy, say Platonism, and Christianity, some form of that. And there are different versions of this dance, or there are different steps in this dance, and at different times they come together, and other times they go further apart. In Pico's time, and because he was a student of Ficino, he was at the academy. It was a time when it was, they were close. There was close dancing then, and there was a whole idea of trying to bring together all of the different faiths to, make a kind of current version of the perennial philosophy. This is why the perennial philosophy idea was so important. So that because it was through it you could embrace all the different faiths. Because the smart people recognize that there's something good in Christianity, but there's something good in Judaism, there's something good in Islam, there's something good in Kabbalah, there's something good in Plato. All these things have good things in them, so we shouldn't get rid of any of them. We should find a way to be able to have all of them. And so this is why some idea like the perennial philosophy, or some notion that, say, Plato somehow prefigured Christ, or Hermes prefigured Christ. This was how Hermes Trismegistus got very high credentials, because he turned up on frescoes on churches and different other ornamentation and paintings in the Vatican. There's one famous sort of shot painting. My memory's failing me now. I don't remember exactly the name of the painter, but it's you have Moses and Jesus and Hermes, and they're like kind of all talking to each other. Mm-hmm. So they're all he was considered of equal importance, So the idea was to find a philosophy or a way of looking at these things where, all these different influences could work together. So Pico tried to do that as well. And he famously came up with these different arguments, these different theses, arguing against or arguing for, in favor of the vision of humanity, the vision of man that he found in the Hermetic writings. And he has the famous oration on the dignity of man. And it's in many ways you can say it's kind of the essence of the modern, because he's celebrating, human potential, human power. You can say he's the one who starts kind of the human potential movement, that gets going in a more popular sense in the 1960s. But he's basically saying that, man is not the kind of lowly, wretched, sinful creature that he was seen in the Middle Ages, in the earlier times. He's noble. This is what the rediscovery of the ancient writings hath wrought. They can see that, yes, the ancients weren't these, decadent, sinful, wretches. They were, intelligent, noble men, and we could learn things from them, and we could also learn things from these teachings, these other philosophies. And so he celebrates human power, and he challenges the church to a debate over these kinds of things, and they're not too happy with it, but he does get his day in court, as it were. And but he's he's not as stable as Ficino. He's much more volatile. And sadly, at some point down the line, he chucks all this stuff and he becomes a follower of Savonarola, who's famous for the bonfire of the vanities. He's this austere, grim, nihilist kind of Catholic terrorist in a way, because he's Savonarola is, again, it's this kind of spin, it's this kind of leap back, it's a kind of leap away from the kind of let's embrace everything sensibility of the Renaissance to this kind of no, here's the pure teaching. And Savonarola, as I said, he's the one who. What they did, they had the bonfire of the vanities, so people just throwing their books, their paintings, their musical instruments, their scientific instruments, whatever it was, onto these bonfires out in the street to show that they didn't need this kind of stuff. The true teaching of the church was enough, and all that kind of thing. So it's mad. So it's why did Pico go over like that? I don't know. He was very unstable. The other guy of that Three Musketeer group is Giordano Bruno, and he was another unstable character, but I think he was made a bit more tougher stuff than Pico in some ways. But the one who made out the best was Ficino. Yeah,
I think he was really knew how to fly under the radar without getting into any trouble.
Yeah, he didn't make a big scene.
But one of the things I really find interesting about Pico is you talked about his syncretism with religion, but also he introduced this idea that the Kabbalah was this, at least to the public.
It proved Christ's divinity or something.
Yeah, the ultimate proof, and only magic with the Kabbalah would be successful. And that he essentially was a master of the Christian Kabbalah, or creator of it, even inheritor of it from his translator. Yeah. But he was also trying to syncretize the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle as well.
Well, it sounds banal, but this is something that runs through the whole book as well, and you can see that it runs through the whole life of the Western mind. It's this kind of constant shift between those two, Plato and Aristotle as well, a kind of synthesizing and then also a separating. Mm-hmm. So you do have lots of people trying to synthesize both Aristotle and Plato, and then you also have ones who say, actually, no, you have to keep these things pure and sharp and definite. And even those two different ways to approach, suggest the two different sort of modes of consciousness associated with the two different sides of the brain. But that is another thing. And then you have people. Well, one of the people who really worked at that of wedding Plato and Aristotle wasn't a Christian, but was a Muslim. Was Suhrawardi, who was this 11th century sort of Sufi, quasi-Sufi, Persian, Zoroastrian, Hermetic, Gnostic mystic, who was assassinated in Aleppo because of his radical kind of views. But the French scholar Henri Corbin has written a great deal about Suhrawardi and the sort of Persian Gnostic philosophy that he represented, but he studied under Aristotelians because Aristotle was very was the philosopher among Islamic scholars and Islamic thinkers. Plato was considered very radical. Plato was considered very, very radical for the longest time. He was considered dangerous. Aristotle wasn't dangerous because Aristotle didn't talk about the kind of higher spiritual sorts of things in the same way that Plato did. So Plato, in a way, was kind of competition for the church or whatever the religion was. Whereas Aristotle, you could use his logic and his kind of categories and he's the first sort of research scientist and kind of thing. So you could use that intellect, that systematizing and organizing mind, and he didn't have to sort of juggle with all the Platonic ideas about the soul and all that kind of thing. But that's why Plato is dangerous, And he still is. I mean, really, when you think about it, he still is considered dangerous today. I mean, that's not in the sense that people can't read or they get beheaded if they do. Well, some places probably, but just that he does speak in intellectual terms and concepts and ideas of this kind of spiritual world. This other world, this other reality that that this material world is only a shadow of, and that's kind of like esotericism 101. So.
Yeah, I mean, I love the way he writes, and I often find myself asking, how many levels of interpretation are there here?
Yeah, I mean, he's he's definitely very important. I mean, some people ask, well, who's it's not a top 10, not even a top 20, but some people say, well, who's the best one? Who's the best secret teacher? So, well, probably the most influential is Plato. I'm not saying I'm a Platonist, just that if you look at it, you just see he's out of him pretty much, all of later kind of, Western esotericism emerges. This is something that's recognized by scholars. I mean, that one of the things that's developed in recent years is the academic study of esotericism, which still relatively recent, but I'm saying that people in that world, see this as well. They recognize that's the case.
Well, I really want to express how grateful I am for you sharing your time with us today.
Oh, my pleasure indeed. Thank you so much.
There's so much more in this book. I really think it's a treasure house. Whether you're familiar with this history or not, again, the way, Gary, that you've put this narrative together and woven all of these streams throughout, it's really, really excellent. And I'm just wondering if you had any final thoughts for people who might be listening, whether it's with regard to the book or not.
Well, I mean, yeah, I very much would like people to read the book. I think it's a good story. It is a history. It's a narrative. I try to make it as readable as possible. And yeah, there's footnotes, but they're there for a reason. But you don't need to. It's not an academic work. I just read a lot, and I like putting it together. But it is a real story, and it's about ourselves, and it's about who we are, I think. And I say at the end of the book, I think it may be the case that we're at a time when one of those times when a possible union of these kind of opposing ways of seeing the world can happen again. I'm not predicting it, but it does seem to be perhaps, or at least it seems to me there may very well be signs that such a kind of fusion could happen again or around, and so that I end on a hopeful note. So that's what I'd like to leave your listeners with.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate that. It's always good to go out on a hopeful note and with a positive thought.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Gary Lachman, I really want to thank you. It's been a pleasure to speak with you, and I hope we can do it again at some point.
Absolutely. I'd love to do it again. So thank you very much, Greg.
In the Occult of Personality membership section, Gary Lachman talks more about his epic tome, The Secret Teachers of the Western World, as we continue to explore some of the most important but lesser-known figures in Western esotericism. Don't miss the second half of this excellent interview. Just go to occultofpersonality.net/membership and join now if you haven't already. It's the best way to support the podcast while receiving access to a tremendous amount of additional exclusive content. Thanks for listening, and until next time.